Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Rules Explained. In this episode, we're going over X-Wing by Fantasy Flight Games. I am John Merritt.
I'm Rob Milton.
Let's get started. In this episode, we're going over Phase 4, the engagement phase, and we'll be going over an example of an attack, and we'll talk about Phase 5. So, in Phase 4, let me back up just a little bit. We did our movement. We talked about the stress test. We did the planning phase. We did the system phase, the activation phase where you move and then you perform an action. Then phase 4, we actually have the engagement phase. This is the fight phase, the attack phase, the shooting phase, whatever you want to call it. They're calling it the engagement phase. So during this phase, each ship engages one at a time. So for the engagement phase, the interesting thing is we start with the highest initiative and work our way back down. Where in the movement phase, we started with the lowest, worked our way up. Now in the engagement phase, we start with the highest and work our way down.
And that makes a lot of sense because the more skilled pilot, the more agile machine should be able to frag the less agile, less experienced pilots before they can react. So I really like that aspect of the game.
I do too. Now in the engagement phase, when a ship engages, it may perform one attack. So your ship may have multiple weapons. You're only doing one attack unless otherwise stated on the card or as a special ability. You have a firing arc. So that weapon has a specific firing arc. So I'm going to jump over to our game here. So in our game, we have a X-Wing looking at a TIE fighter. He has a firing arc of 90 degrees in front of him. So as you can see, this TIE fighter is at range 2. So his firing arc, 90 degrees in front, the TIE fighter is at range 2. Now you also have this middle bar going across. That is a direct fire right in front of you, and we'll talk about that later.
Now, John, just real quick question. It appears to me, and this is where the game needs to be more accurate. I think it appears to me that it might be at range 1. Am I mistaken that just by looks? Because doesn't that TIE fighter appear to be touching that range 1 band?
He could be, and that's a good argument. I mean, if I was judging it, I would say no.
Okay.
But again, you would take this, your ruler, if you didn't have a nice little handy game here, drop that down. Oh, moving back a little bit. And that always what makes for interesting conversations and arguments during these kind of games. Is that range 1 or range 2? Personally, I would say he's at range 2 because the closest piece of plastic isn't in the range 1 area yet. Let me bounce back here. So that's the firing arcs, the targeting restrictions. I highlighted this because this is important. The target must be at range 1 through 3. There is such thing as a range 0, and that is when two ships are actually touching. When the bases are touching each other, that is considered range 0. And when they're range 0, they cannot attack each other. So they must be at range 1 through 3. So we kind of went through an example of targeting. Performing an attack. These 6 steps are crucial. And in 2nd edition, they cleaned this up. In 1st edition, they had this flow chart, which they put out at a later time because there was some confusion as to modifying the dice rolls. So the first step is declaring a target. The attacker is attacking, the defender is defending. The attack dice, the attacking player rolls the attack dice, which is the red. So on each of the cards, there's a red stat. You can see this one is a forward arc only and has a 3, which means you're rolling 3 red dice. Now this is the interesting part. It says after you roll, then the defending player may use their abilities that modify the attack dice. So I roll to attack. Rob then performs any abilities or cards he has to modify my dice. Then the attacking player can choose what cards he wants to modify the dice again. So this is important. So I roll the dice. He plays any cards which affect my dice. I then play any cards which affect the attacking dice. And let's say I have 2 hits. He has a defense of 2. You can see that by the green icon with the 2 underneath it. So he grabs 2 dice, grabs them, rolls them. I then play any cards which modify his dice. And then he gets to play some cards that modify his dice. In first edition, this was never really explained that well.
That is correct. And just so the listener understands a little bit more, since we haven't talked about how to modify these dice, there are all sorts of cards out there that can boost weapon power or simulate damage because of critical hits, or perhaps you have a jamming system. So there's all different sorts of ways that you can go ahead and modify the number of dice an attacker can have, and of course the number of dice that a defender can have. And just like you said, John, I love the idea that it's now clarified the order in which the modifications occur.
Yeah.
And the attacker always gets the last say in the attack dice. The defender always gets the last say in the defense dice.
Yep. Neutralizing results. So hits are on the red dice. Now, I'm sorry, that's not hits. That's interesting. An attack is either an explosion that's filled in or an explosion that's hollow. The one that's filled in is a hit. The one that is hollow is a critical hit. For every evade token that is shown on the defending dice, and that's a dot with a little arrow around it, I'll show it later when we do an example, that negates a hit. So first the hits are resolved, then the critical hits are resolved. And I'll show that later. The attack hits if at least one hit or critical hit results remain, because in first edition there was always a huge debate on that. What is considered a hit? Well, a hit is if it actually damages the ship. That it is then considered to be hit. Otherwise, the attack misses. A damage is dealt. The defender suffers damage equal to the remaining hits and critical hits.
And this is important, that idea about hits, because if I have shields, you could argue, and we have argued this, that my ship was not hit because the shields absorbed it. But now in this edition, it clarifies, even if you have shields, you have been hit. And then you deal damage, and then you take care of your shield after that, but you have definitely been hit, regardless of your shield status or any other special ability.
Yep. The damage dealt, you first do hits, then you deal critical hits. The aftermath, abilities that trigger after an attacks are resolved. So we'll deal with the aftermath when we have one. I don't, in fact, have an example of one because I can't think of any off the top of my head. Then, like what Rob was saying, for shields now come in red and blue, and they are the same token. So as you take hits, you just flip them over. So you first, like I said before, you first account for the hits, and then you account for the critical hits. When you run out of shields, you then start taking hull damage, which is this yellow value down here. Once you run out of hull, you blow up. You're done. So here, let's move into an actual example of an attack. Let's roll some dice. Let's flip back over to our game here. So our TIE fighter is going to shoot at, I'm sorry, our X-Wing is going to shoot at our TIE fighter. Luke here has an attack value of 3, as you can see by the 3 with the forward arc. I grab my 3 dice, I roll them. I scored 1 hit and 1 critical. And because this is an example, we aren't going to be concerned about. Okay, so then at this point, Rob would play any cards he would have to modify my dice. And then I would play any cards to modify my dice. I'm sorry, I roll, he plays some cards to modify my dice roll, then I play cards to modify my dice roll again. So for the sake of the example, I have a hit and I have critical hits. The TIE Fighter, as you can see, this poor Academy pilot has an evade of 3. So he has 3, it's got the arrow, it's green with a circle around it, it says 3. He grabs 3 dice, rolls them. He gets 1 evade. So the evade, you can see I have a hit and a critical hit. This evade first negates this hit. So the TIE Fighter is left with 1 critical hit.
Because the rules state that you get rid of hits first and critical hits last.
Correct. So since he doesn't have any shields, he takes a hull damage. So we come over here. He gets a hit. So.
But
what?
It's a critical hit.
Oh my gosh, you're absolutely correct. That is a critical hit. So this card flips over.
It's the same damage card. It still indicates that has taken 1 hull hit, but there's also a special effect that is an addition to that damage point.
So this is a fuel leak. So it says after you suffer 1 critical damage, suffer 1 damage card, and after you suffer 1 critical hit damage, suffer 1 hit damage and repair this. What, dude? That makes no sense. Explain that to me.
It sounds goofy. What I'm imagining here is, in a narrative sense, is I've got fuel leaking out of my ship, and if I go ahead and get hit with another critical hit, it's going to go ahead and blow up, in my face, causing more damage to my ship. But because it blew up, now the fuel leak is gone, and because it blew up all the fuel. So
okay.
The term repair does not literally mean it's repaired. It just means that's their keyword for get rid of this card.
Okay, so basically the next time I suffer a critical hit, I take an additional hit.
Right, and then the fuel leak goes away.
And then the fuel leak goes away. Or on my next turn, my action would be to repair this card.
Yes.
So then once I spend the action to repair it, it would then flip over and just be a normal hit again.
Exactly. Meantime, but now, don't forget, because you have an ongoing effect, don't we have to place a critical hit marker now on my TIE Fighter?
I would say so, because you're right. This is an ongoing effect.
Because that's the purpose of the critical hit markers, is to remind the players that there's something about that ship that needs to be taken into account. So when we move, or when we get shot at, or when we shoot, we should always be referring to the critical hit cards on our model. Do we have critical hit markers?
I know we do. I've seen them. This is really funny and embarrassing at the same time. I love it. I don't see it there. It's the one with the little explosion in the middle. Yeah, it's not automatic. Where are you? No, it doesn't look like we do. I'm shocked.
But if you don't have the second edition of the rules and you're still going ahead and using, or if you don't have these markers, if you're using first edition, or if you're using a game that doesn't have these markers, any glass bead or perhaps a penny, or if you want to turn this into some sort of gambling game, you could use quarters and $50, and whoever wins gets to collect all the critical hit markers.
Absolutely. Oh, that's funny.
Rules but yes, Xplained does not condone gambling in any way, shape, or form.
That's awesome. All right, let me flip back over to our rules here. So in a nutshell, and at a very basic level, that's how a combat round is done.
Just for kicks and giggles, let's shoot at the X-Wing.
Sure.
Just to go ahead and reinforce how this whole system works.
Yeah, so, oops, let me click over here. Okay, so at this point now, the X-Wing is going to shoot at Luke. We look at the X-Wing.
We can assume the same range?
Yep, he has a range of 2. Oh, the other thing, the one thing they haven't talked about yet in the ranges is if you're at range of 1, you get an additional attack die.
Yeah, that's why I brought that up for the range earlier. But yeah, we're at range 2, so you are correct.
And at range 3, the defender would get an extra evade die. But they haven't talked about that in the rules yet. All right, so he gets an attack of 2. Oops. I messed that up. Click roll. So there, the TIE Fighter got 1 hit.
And then what's Luke's defense here?
2. Wow,
2.
I thought the X-Wing would have been more nimble than that.
Oh, you know what? I think this is Luke when he was the farm boy.
Yeah.
He's still focusing on Ratch.
All right, so he got nothing. So that's a miss and a miss. So he gets 1 hit. He has a shield. Val, you have 2. So we flip over a shield token.
He's still been hit according to the definition of the rules, but he actually took no damage because the shields went ahead and absorbed that hit.
Correct. Let me flip back. All right, and then that takes us to the end of the phase. During the end phase, players remove all green and orange tokens. Remove all green and orange circular tokens. This is interesting because I read this. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I went back and I looked. The green and orange tokens are strictly for actions. So any action you've done then comes back because we are now starting a new turn. If both players have at least 1 ship remaining, play proceeds to the next round, winning the game. After the phase ends, the player checks to see if someone who hasn't won the game, if only 1 player has a ship remaining and the player in their area wins the game. After this phase ends, the players check to see if someone has won the game. If only 1 player has a ship remaining in the play area, that player wins. So it goes down to who has the last ship on the field. But I'm sure there's many different types of games out there with different circumstances and objectives. Like an escort, you got to move the ship from one side of the board to the other, many different ways.
It'd be hard to explain how I won the game if the ship I was escorting was destroyed.
Yeah, it's not going to work. All right, and that's going to do it for this episode. Next week, we're going to go into the additional rules because there's a lot of other actions we're able to do, and there's a lot of other nuances about this game, like I mentioned with the range and the extra dice and stuff that they haven't quite gone over yet. So on that note, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for giving us music. You guys did a fantastic job with the music. You can find us on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube. If you have any questions or concerns, please email us at rulesexplained@gmail.com. Guys, thanks for listening.
Adios.